Okay, starting off, this is a SeedStar XP class. So, rundown of what SeedStar XP is basically you'll be able to get singulation, downforce, and coefficient of variation over what you would basically have SeedStar 2. So it's a lot like SeedStar 2. Just make sure everybody's in the right class. You've all got that on your planners or are getting it or new to it. Okay. I'm Scott Fitzke from Location Manager in Lexington.
Nick Carl, CTS here in Hastings.
Okay, so we'll first, just by starting off, guessing most of you guys are probably running with a 2630 display. We'll start off by just going through setting up a layout page, or a home page, sorry. And you'll start by going to the main menu on your 2630 and then into Layout Manager. And then you have the option of which page you want it on. So you got an option of 5 pages. Select a page and make sure you check the box that says Include in Homepage Selection. And then from there you will go out to which style of layout you want. We'll put the planner in this big red part, and right here you will select planner. And then the next one over will be Green Star 3, that performance monitor. Yep. Most of the time we'll put like a map along the side. And then once you have it like you want it, go ahead and hit enter. And then, so now you've got one of 3. If he hits the home button, it goes to the one that we made with the map on it. For what we're doing here, we're just going to go through the main planner run page. Go ahead and hit the main menu, and you can go into the planner, and that gives you all the boxes along the sides for the settings. So starting at the top, where you have your when you hit the F button, it always brings you back to this page. And that 32,000 up there, that is your population that you've got it commanded to run. You can hit that box there, and it will bring up a list of rates at that, or if you have just 2 of those rates turned on, it will toggle between 28 and 36 or whatever you have set in there for your dry land and irrigated acres if you don't want to do a prescription. And then you would only have to hit the button one time if you just have two rates turned on. Next box over is your actual seeds per acre. So when he hits that box, that is a combined total for the whole planner. And when he hits it again, it will set it for each motor. So this example, this planner has 3 motors on it. So going down, the next box down is your planner at a glance page. This is where you're probably going to watch your population the most. The center line is currently set at 28,000 right now. And when you change that, it will recenter that line. So you'll be able to, it'll change the bar graph, or the center line, so you can tell your highs and your lows really easy. Then below there, the green boxes, that is if you have row command on your planner. The green box means it's green, it's ready to plant, and black means you've got it manually turned off, and white or gray means that you're already in a planted area and it will not turn on because section control is controlling it. Does anybody have any questions on that part of it? Okay. And of course, what he was doing with the arrows, you can toggle back and forth. The box clear up on the top right there, the QS reset, that is quick start reset. So if you want to stop, if you decide to stop planting in the middle field with your planter down and you do not want to pick up and back up and lower it back down, if you want to just start from right there, you can hit that button, and what it'll do is start counting 6 seconds down. You've got 6 seconds for it to start moving, and the hydraulic drive kick in a little bit quicker than they normally would. So the next box down after that is the rotate meters button. So your planter has to be up, and you've got to be stopped for this to work. You can hit the button at the bottom right there. Each time you hit it, it is a half turn. So when you're filling the meters, go ahead and turn your vac on. Hit the button probably 3 times, I'd suggest, to get them clear full. Make sure you got seed coming out of all rows, and then you won't have a skip on the end of the field. Yes?
At the end of the year last year, I was parked, planter up in the order. Sometimes that would be sensing, it would say planter's moving or down. What sensor is that sensing that off of? That could be failing, I'm assuming, because I'm parked, planter up, and it's saying that it's sensing either movement or that might be a planter.
I would tell you that it was probably your height sensor on your, what type of planter do you have?
1770.
Okay, so a pull type.
Yeah.
It was probably the height sensor that's back, it's on the lift wheels. There's a linkage.
The middle ones are?
Yeah, in the middle. Yeah, it'd be in the middle ones, and I'd tell you that that sensor was probably going bad. You could go check it. I doubt that it thought it was moving, because if you had radar or GPS, I'm sure it was because of the. So we'll go through some more of this where you can check that. So go ahead and cancel there. Okay, so that should be it for that section. So down to the next set of boxes, you've got acre counters. You can do a 0 or count down to 0. So if you got 150 acres in a field, you want to watch where you're at the whole time. It'll count down to you got 20 left or whatever. We'll show you where you input that at. And then also, it's not in the simulator here, but you can do acres 1 and 2, and then acres per hour. And then the other thing that'll be in here is your vacuum. You'll have one of these selected to a vacuum. So you can see the vac. Let's see here. Next box over is just the same thing. You can just different input. Box going down here, the rows, that's your min and your max. So if you got, it's going to look at your high rows all the time and low rows. So you might just want to sit there and watch that the whole time, or not the whole time, but it'll show you that.
And this would be tied in depending on what you have selected over here. So if you're looking at singulation versus spacing, your downforce, that'll change that box.
Yep.
Okay, so as we kind of jump down in the bottom here, we're going to see a bunch more icons. This will be a little bit different from your regular SeedStar 2. So as we jump to each one of these, we'll see a combination of our quick reference graph up here change, as well as some more detailed information down on the bottom. So our first one will be our population. That's the graph that we talked about the first time. And we're going to see, we'll have an indication of which row is at its minimum, which one is at its max. The scan will cycle through those rows and change as we go through. If you do have a row that you want to address and look further into, you can come down here and change that row number and just type that in, and then it'll give you that information for just that row. So the next box over, we pull that up, we'll kind of see some of these icons change. If you notice in the upper right hand corner, that icon is showing you that you've got 2 seeds side by side. So our bar graph here will represent, if we move to the top of that graph, we're going to have our doubles. If we move to the bottom of that graph where we see the circle looks kind of with an X through it, that's going to be our skip. So we might use this as a tool to help fine tune those rows for better performance. Again, down here at the bottom, we see a much more detailed view of that information. So if we're really wanting to break out a row that's causing us some grief, we'll dive in just a little bit deeper there. Go down to our spacing. So when we look at our spacing here, this graph is even a little bit different yet. So really this graph, we want all of these bars to be down at the bottom. So ideally, when we look at our value shown over here at the bottom, we want to see this at a 0.35 or below. If we see that going up above that value, again, we're going to have something we're going to address. We're going to have some effect from some misplaced seeds. The cycle button up here next, we'll just cycle through some of those pages rather than selecting them. Okay, if we jump down to our scale there, so this is going to show the actual margin that we have in down pressure up on our actual row unit. We won't jump into margin a whole lot, that's in another class, but what margin really is that's going to give us the extra weight that is we're carrying on those gauge wheels. So we have a number of forces that happen against our row unit. We have opposing forces like the ground condition or soil types that we're in. We also have opposing forces like row cleaners that are pushing down, that are helping lift that row unit up. So that's something that we're going to want to make sure that we carry enough extra weight on the row unit so we maintain a good ride quality, and more importantly that we stay at depth so we're not lifting that row unit out of the ground and planting a shallow seed. Do our next graph here. Okay, so this is our good ride. This graph, once again, is kind of flipped the other way around. This again is a good idea to always jump back to that quick reference card if you're kind of looking to see what a value should look like there. Generally speaking, we want to make sure that we have our ride quality above 90%. So what that means is that that row unit is staying put and in place, so we don't have a lot of row unit bounce and moving around. I like to use this as a speedometer. Now, that being said, I could come in here, and we'll get to this in a second, but I could add more weight to that row unit and push that row unit down and keep it in place pretty easily. But when I do that, I'm throwing a bunch of unnecessary weight on that row, and ultimately it'll be causing some sidewall compaction as I push down those gauge wheels. So, when we look at good ride, this value is really in combination with how much weight we're throwing down the row unit. So, in summary, I would not get too aggressive with pushing down on weight, just like you wouldn't in any other scenario. You should be walking back and digging to make sure we're not pushing down and causing a bunch of compaction issues. And then coming back and monitoring that ride quality and keeping that above 90%. There's times that maybe we need to be going 3 miles an hour because we're in a really rough area of the field. And that ultimately is what's going to give us a better ride and a better seed placement, as opposed to just pushing harder down on that row unit. Again, like I said, they talk much more in depth in the downforce class, but that's really what we're after with those adjustments. Next box, please. So we've talked a few different times about diving down just a little bit deeper. So we have some of these graphs as a quick reference to cycle through as we're running through the field. But ultimately, if we want to dive into the performance of a row, this totals page is a nice area to come in and see how we're really performing. We have the option at the top that we can cycle through and pick out a specific row and figure out what's happening there. Do I need to make some changes or address something on that row unit? This is where we would dive in deeper for that. Last one. So this is an overall of the whole planner. Again, it's a combination of a lot of the information that we had on the last screen. It just displayed it to us numerically in a format that we can really dive into the whole planner itself. We'll jump back here and then we'll talk about downforce. So over here we see this target icon. If we click that, we're going to get another box. We can increase or decrease the amount of extra weight we want to push down on that planter or on those row units for. So that change really is going to be affected there. If we want to dive in deeper on the row units and see how they're performing, then we can use one of the other tools down here at the bottom to get to that spot. Any questions on this down here? That's really how we're diving in much further with the system to see our overall performance. Okay, so now if there's no other questions about that, we'll jump into some of the other setup options. We'll change some seeds out, and then we'll lastly jump into some diagnostics so we can look how to address some issues that might come up out in the field. So anytime we see an up arrow, Deere says that's a setup item. So if we click our first one, the planter, that's a planter setup. In here, most of the time, this is just configured whenever the planter is new or if there's a major change on the planter. Other than that, there really isn't a whole lot of need to jump in here and make many changes. So this essentially is where we're going to tell the controller on the planter exactly what is there and to expect for information coming in. If we jump into the sensor tab, we'll start to get some more options of what's on there. We've got a number of drop-down menus that are in here where we'll configure each of those sensors that are on the planter. For this one in particular, we're talking about downforce. In this one, we have 3 sensors in total, and then we can come over here and tell it, of the 3 sensors, numbers 1, 2, or 3, what row that sensor is on. We'll also see if we want to enable or disable a sensor. This would be something you could do if you had a sensor that was failing or causing you some grief. You wanted to get through that field and get done before you ran to go get parts. We could disable that so we don't have to worry about that causing issues throughout that field or that area. From there, normally we would have a reset icon down here. It's a simulator, so you're going to have to take it with a grain of salt. But more importantly is if the planter was up in the air and I did not see those sensor readings at 0, we're going to want to reset or re-zero those sensors out so we don't have any bad information. I know some guys will reset this once a day. I would say at a minimum, once a week, or if you're doing any type of hybrid changeover, crop changeover, it's a good idea to come zero those out because really, we talked earlier, earlier about how we're looking at the overall performance of that planter, and if we are receiving bad information in for either ride quality or how hard we're pushing down, ultimately that's going to affect our depth. And that's something we definitely don't want to come in shallow and have some issues there. So it's an easy way to come in here, re-zero those out, like I said, once a week or so. We'll go down through a few of these vacuum. This is another one. This is what that icon should look like. We tell how many sensors are on there. And then we want to see these rest at 0 when we don't have the vacs running. So if you see that they're not at 0, turn everything off, re-zero them out. If you're seeing that trending where one's always bouncing up, it might be time to start looking at putting a new sensor on there or figuring out what's going on with that one. Height sensor. So if we have these shared as common, this is where we'll calibrate the up and the down position. If we click on these boxes, let's do like the up one, it'll tell you fully raise it, hit the enter button, and then that fully raised position has been marked. The same thing with the fully down position. Now if we wanted to have, we'll see if it works on this simulator. If we change to separate and then click that box, we can have different heights set. So if you have that rotary style lift switch that would have the ability to show a different height position, that's where we would see it at here, and this number is changing in the simulator. So you could come in and hit your box at that height that you wanted if you want to just manually line it up, or you can just type in a number in the box if you kind of know where you want things set. Once we're done there, we can accept the changes we've made. Typically, probably drawn versus mounted, wouldn't you say?
Yep.
So, next one down, tractor speed. So, by default, this is left in auto. And what auto will do is it'll pick from the 3 available sources that it really has out there for tractor speed. If we uncheck it, the auto button, then we'll get those options. So if we hit that drop down, I just like to explain these. This icon here is the radar icon. So that'll be picking up any type of radar speed if you have a radar in your tractor. This will be a wheel or a transmission speed. And then the manual speed will be if you're entering just a straight speed. So if all the satellites fell out of the sky, we could in theory still run by putting in a manual speed without any other information to take off. I really wouldn't recommend that, as you know, our population basically is set because it expects that we're always traveling that speed no matter what. When we leave that on auto and recheck that, I would use this down here as a diagnostic tool to see if we have that information coming in or not. We can also see this in diagnostics, but this would be something if you had a radar that was causing you some grief, or if you had tall grass in an area that was waving, that would give you a speed, and that would disable some of those other functions on having that. You usually only hear about that on older sprayers and things, but you can see if that number is fluctuating in here. It can be from tall grass that's below it. I think downforce. Yep, we talked about zeroing those out. Okay, drive sections. So we've got the ability in here. This is generally just pre-configured on which row units are tied with which drives. That's something we generally only do once the planer is new in an initial setup. If we go to the next drop down, row sections. So some growers will like to tie in the outside two rows together, so that way we're not leaving any gaps out there. When one shuts off, they're both going to shut off together. The easiest way I can explain this is this will walk you through the setup if we go through this, and it'll ask you for a total number of sections, and then of that section, how many rows you want with it. So if you decide to make changes in here, the best thing you can do is come back and look at this picture. This picture will change depending on how you have it configured and set up. So if you make an error in there, no harm, no foul, because you've got a nice picture to come back and reference to make sure, hey, I want my outside rows paired together and I want everything else single. Make sense? Okay. So that's it on our planner setup. Our next box down is our seed setup. Up here at the top, we'll see our crop names. We can have some pre-stored in there if we hit that drop down. There we've got corn and soybeans. When we do change that up here, you'll also notice that our disc type is changing and the number that we have in here. More importantly, we want to point out when we get to the corn side, we want to make sure on the seed disc, if we've got the ProMax 40 plates in there, we want to make sure that we have that selected, versus if we go to the top of the list, it'll have our standard plate. Standard plate would be what you'd have if you're running E-sets in there. The only other time, the only thing I really point out on this screen is one of two things. Our population adjusts. So if we're running soybeans at a higher rate, typically the seed tubes cannot calculate that high of a rate coming through. And so really just to make our graphs look right, we can come in here and adjust this number to make our graphs look normal. Now that's not changing any type of rates or anything else. It's just changing how that graph looks, so it'll even out for you. We can separate, if we have multiple hydraulic drives on a planter, we can separate left, center, and right, or if we've got a left and right section, and change those to 2 different rates. It's not quite so common. Most guys are going to leave this where they're all tied together. When they type in a rate, that's what they're going to expect to see. Under the show rates box here, this is where we'll enter in different rates. You can turn them on and off. If we have 2 and we're on that home screen, it'll just cycle between the 2. If we see more than 2, we'll have to pick out of a box. And then, yep, we'll go in our change rates to actually make that change. The last one here, we'll bring up rate 6 is what Deere always looks at for prescriptions. So that'll either be on and off. And then this looks a little bit different than the other ones. This is going to be just a percentage off, since Since we don't know what the rate is going to be in that given area, it tells us that, okay, we want that prescription to be performing within 10% of that value, whatever it might be. You can bring those down, whereas opposed to this one, the rate 1, they pre-populate these rates in there for you. You can go in and change that to whatever you want. And then we do see, the simulator doesn't show it here properly, but once we have a target rate in there, we should see an average spacing still down there at the bottom too. So when we're out digging and we're checking to see our performance and making sure we're checking to see how we're doing, we've got that quick calculation there. We jump back, now we hit that box. It's just going to cycle between the two as opposed to pulling up that big set of box that had our rate information in it. All right, next one down, our totals. So earlier we talked about, we had a couple of those drop downs where we could pick the acres that we've covered. We've got our 1 and 2, and then our counting down. So if we were going to count down, we had a 150 acre field. We want to count down from there. That's where we would reset that total. We're also going to see lifetime counters on the planner, both in hours and total acres covered. The only time this acres number is ever going to be different is if a controller has been replaced in the planner. It's not too often that we see those, but every once in a while we'll have one that those total acres are off a bit. So generally you just want to keep an eye on that if you ever have any work done. We don't have the ability, unfortunately, with software to change that, so whatever's in there is in there. Think of it like the odometer on your car. You can't go in and tweak that. This is the same way. All right, the last thing, let's jump in, let's just do diagnostics. So diagnostics, this would be a tool, one of many tools you could jump into to see, hey, do I have an issue with a particular sensor? We can see the expected reading. And then more importantly, as we look through the different ones, a lot of them are going to give us a voltage range. So if we've got a pinched wire, or if we just have a sensor that's bad, if I've got good voltage there and that looks okay, that tells me wiring up to it is probably all right. So you might want to look at just the switch or the sensor itself. We drop that down, there's a few other options in there. There's our supply voltages. Regular rate drives. This is a good idea if we've got multiple drive sections on a planner. And let's say that we were watching on our main run page and we noticed that maybe that right wing is dragging down a little bit, or it's consistently high or consistently low. We can come in here and dive in just a little bit deeper and say, okay, if I've got one of my motors, and I've got one of them that's dragging, we talked about on a wing, and its RPM is significantly less than the rest. Okay, right there I know that, yeah, that's why my population is low. I've got one dragging. The other thing we can look at is how that valve, that hydraulic motor, is being commanded. So if we have one that has a significantly higher output, we probably have something holding that whole drive section back. And that could be something, down in the meter itself, to a bearing or something else that's causing that section to drag. So good tools in here to come in to see your wheel sensor and ground speed, target population. You kind of get everything at once. Your planer position, up or down. If that's flickering, you might know, okay, well that's actually where that's coming from. That's causing some grief. What else do we have in the drop down? Yeah, that's just your sections. Downforce sensors, again, we're going to want to make sure they're zeroed out. If they're showing readings other than 0, sitting with planner in the air, then you're going to have to probably address something on that sensor. C-tubes, if you have some issues going on with C-tubes, you think we've got some bad readings coming out of there, pretty easy to swap from row to row. Or you could come in here and look into the sensors themselves and figure out, if you want to drop some seed down there, figure out if they're reading or not. That's an option to come see him in here too. If you want to actually drop some seed through it, see what the count is, you can do that and compare. This one will be pretty relevant. Our variable rate drive motor valve flush. So we talked about a motor that was dragging down. And let's say we didn't have anything mechanical or anything in the meter that was dragging that down. The next thing I would probably do is come in here and look at flushing out that motor. So these motors typically run at a range, and they kind of sit here all day long in the same area. So they never really go above or below that. So they have a tendency of one of sticking in that range, which is why we see them drag or hang high or hang low. So when we come in here, what we can do is we got to be moving at least a couple mile an hour, and we can go up to 3 seconds to flush that valve out. So if you turn all your vacuum off and go run this, that's going to run those motors up and down to kind of that full swing they're not normally used to running in. And that'll help them not stick anymore if you have them sticking. So this is a good tool to come in or beginning of the season just to run everything and run those motors up and down all the way and kind of run them through their paces before you ever go out to the field. Row clutches, you can go through here and toggle your clutches to make sure they're functioning properly, sitting manually. This just basically tests the system out to make sure that those clutches are functioning properly. Again, a good thing to do before you go out for the season for the first time, or if you're noticing some issues out in the field of a row not shutting off, you can come in here and check them. There's one more in here. What's it? Rotate meters. This is somewhat similar to what you would see when you're priming your meters up on the main screen, but we can see that planer position. We can see those drive motors and then run those motors individually. Since we've got just a few more minutes here, any questions first of all? Yes, sir.
You're putting your varieties in ahead of time. I've always used Apex. Is that my John Deere Operations Center? Does that work too?
It does, yes. Yeah, I would say it's probably a little bit easier in Op Center than it is in Apex. A lot of the varieties are all pre-built in there. So once you start typing them in, it pre-populates all that information for you, so you don't have any errors when you're trying to put that variety in. Or you don't have one spelled a little bit differently than the next, and you kind of get a mess when you build it that way. So yeah, you can build a whole setup file from Op Center. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, we'll send you guys on to the next class. That's all I got for you.
Thank you.